All right, good morning. I'm going to turn things over to the Sheriff's Office to start this morning.
Good morning, Captain Josh Phillips here with Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office, PHILLIPS. Just give you an update on the press release we sent out, I believe, Sunday morning of an incident that occurred in rural Garrettson near 256 and 484. Initial call came over at around 2:53 on Saturday. The report was it was a domestic assault with a firearm. The victim in this case was able to leave the residence. When deputies arrived, they attempted to make contact with the suspect in this case, and that suspect produced a compound bow with an arrow knocked in it, so it's basically a loaded firearm. And we were unsuccessful in having any dialogue with that individual. There were several hours that we did not have any contact with him. Deputies did leave the scene for a short time. The individual, the suspect in this case, then came outside again with the compound bow and was waving it at oncoming traffic. Deputies again immediately responded, set up a perimeter and attempted to have contact with the suspect in this case. The SWAT team was dispatched along with our crisis negotiators. That process went on for several hours. During that process, the suspect in this case did produce a compound bow, did shoot that at our Bearcat that was on scene at least 2 times. Did throw about every household item at the Bearcat to include oil, radiator fluid, a hammer, mustard, milk, brake fluid. And so the reason we have that armored vehicle is for protection of our officers. So having that it was very key in this situation. Having the negotiators there, eventually we're able to negotiate with him, and he was arrested around 2:30 on Saturday morning with no major incidents or no major injuries, and then a search warrant was conducted later on that morning where we recovered the the compound bow and several firearms. The individual that was arrested was last of ACHTERBERG, first of Chad, middle of Allen, who's a 53-year-old Garrettson man, and so he'll be initial arraignment today on charges of obstructing, resisting, felony intentional damage to property, aggravated assault on law enforcement, aggravated assault on the passerby that was on the highway, aggravated assault domestic, and then several other charges are probably pending until we can go through all the statements of our officers, the victim, the other victims on the highway. So there is additional pending charges probably coming in the near future. So there is maybe some questions on the compound bow, and as a hunter, that was a fixed blade knocked bow, so it is basically just has to pull it back and shoot. And you ask any hunter, those can go a long way. And even if one of those fixed blades, nicks an arm or a leg, it's just not a nick. It is a severe wound that will bleed out and cause just as much damage as any other weapon. And so that we take just as serious as a firearm, but probably even more serious. It's just one of those that we don't deal with, but it was on the level of utilize all resources as possible and safe distance and cover. So any questions on that case?
How's the victim in the case?
She was safe. She was able to leave unharmed, and so we're going through that process as services were offered to her and everything, but she is fine.
You mentioned that deputies left at one point and then returned. Can you explain a little bit more the reasoning behind that?
There's a lot of factors and reasoning to that. A rural setting that I can tell you was not easy to have any communication. There was a lot of circumstances, a lot of different construction equipment that surrounded the property. It was a overgrown forest with weeds about 3 or 4 foot tall, and so At the time, we didn't feel it was safe to have any dialogue with the BO and without talking to the PA and everything. And there was a significant amount of time that we were unable to communicate with him, and he did not have a cell phone. We believe the individual was on some type of either drug or alcohol, so it's irrational to deal with, and we made a determination. We couldn't get any closer, we couldn't make any contact with him, so we were gonna be in the surrounding area, and then hopefully after a significant amount of time, that individual came to his senses and we were able to communicate with him. As soon as he made any direct threat to any citizens, and we immediately responded. So that was a call we made at the time that we felt was in the best interest for everybody.
What
And
was
so-
the time difference between the time he left and the time he returned, and he made that
Maybe
initial?
10, 15 minutes, and then he came back out, so. And that's when, again, then we started talking. PA had the initial, tried to have some conversations with him, called the SWAT team in CNU, and then set up our perimeter and everything containment.
And how many agencies were involved?
So we had Sioux Falls PD was very instrumental in their SWAT team. Portions of their SWAT team came, and then their drone unit. We had a drone, but they brought their drone unit up, and that was, especially with our terrain, and it got late at night. That was key in everything we did. The South Dakota Highway Patrol was there basically about when we got there at 3 o'clock. They helped with the outer containment. Emergency management with lights and other needed equipment for us. MedStar, Brandon Fire, and if I recall, I think even a park ranger from Palisades Park even came and helped shut down traffic. And a little different than the cities. Some of the city calls are close to the city, maybe at Crooks, Hartford or something, where we can get a lot of aid. This is rural Minnehaha County, and so we're dealt with the terrain and everything else that the elements in the country provide, and so we need additional resources. So that was very key in everything we did. And I'll go on to this. What we did is it was a long drawn out process, 12 hours. Victim was okay and suspect uninjured, unharmed. All deputies and responders were the same, and so I think even though it was drawn out and everything, it was a successful event for us. So we're proud of the work that everybody did and the outcome. Anything else? Thank you.
Okay, a couple of things to talk about. The first thing I'm going to cover is we had a woman that was arrested for manslaughter recently. This case began back in July. On July 20th, we had a call about an infant that was essentially a medical call that they were not breathing. It was a 2-month-old baby boy. What we learned was mom had been washing or bathing the boy and left him unattended for some period of time. At some point when he was unattended, his head went underwater and ended up dying from that. He was taken from that scene, from the apartment building, to a hospital, and later an autopsy was conducted by the coroner and determined that cause of death. After our detectives interviewed everybody, basically completed the investigation, that information was sent to the state's attorney's office for review, and a warrant was issued last week on August 25th for manslaughter and an abuse or cruelty to a minor. That warrant carries a $25,000 cash bond. The woman was arrested Sunday morning. Her last name is Swenson Marshall, SWENSON MARSHALL. First is Ashlyn, ASHLYNN. Middle is Elizabeth, ELIZABETH, and she's 20 from Sioux Falls. There is an affidavit on file that has more of the details, but that's essentially what we're dealing with and which led to her arrest.
She get into custody without incident?
I don't know. She was arrested in Madison, so I don't have details on her arrest.
What, Do we normally arrest someone in a circumstance like this?
You mean like the death of an infant?
I mean, yeah, with, I guess what were the circumstances, instead of calling this an accident, what led up to the arrest?
I think most of what we're dealing with hinges on the time frame. So this wasn't just a matter of seconds that she left. I don't know if we have the exact time frame that she left that infant unattended, but it may have been anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes. I think that's according to the affidavit. So that's probably one of the bigger factors. You may have to talk to the state's attorney's office about why they decided to move forward with charges on this end. But obviously, there's sometimes when police charge people, other times it's the investigation, and then let the state's attorney or city attorney's office make that determination. And that was the case in this one. There's times when infants have died, and we've investigated that, and there's not charges. Every single one of those incidents are looked at closely, but it's really a case-by-case basis. So there's not one kind of set of things that happens. If somebody will be charged, if they will not be charged, it really depends on the exact circumstances of that particular case.
Any extenuating circumstances beyond the 7 to 10 minute time frame?
I don't believe so. I think that's essentially, I mean, when you're talking about an infant that young, they don't have any means to care for themselves, and so leaving them unattended in a bath at really any point is probably not a good idea, especially when you're talking, maybe it was 2 minutes, maybe it was 30 seconds. Really, when you're talking about an infant that young, that amount of time is enough for something bad to happen. The other thing, this is one of the aggravated assaults. This was began Friday afternoon, a little after 4 p.m., and this was near First Street and Prairie Avenue. We had a man and woman that were outside on the sidewalk talking. The man's car was parked basically right next to them, and it was left running. As the two were talking, another guy came walking along, or suspect. He jumped into that running car, started to drive away. The guy saw that, he went over, he tried to get the suspect out of the car. As the car was driving, the victim was drugged a short distance. The woman had jumped in front of the car to try to get him to stop, and the suspect hit her with the car. She basically flew in the air for a short distance, had some minor injuries, was going to seek doctors or medical attention on her own. So we had that initial report of that stolen car and the 2 different aggravated assault charges that happened as a result of that. About 10:30 p.m., we had officers that found that stolen car driving near 14th Street and Cliff Avenue. When they went to stop it, there was a pursuit that happened, and they ended up going north on Cliff Avenue and came to the intersection at 10th Street and Cliff. The suspect driving the stolen car ran a red light, hit another car that was driving through the intersection. That was pushed into a car that had been stopped on the opposite side for traffic. The driver of the stolen car got out, took off running. He was caught a short distance away. There was a passenger that was in the car as well. He actually stayed with the car, didn't try to run or anything like that. The car that was struck in the intersection, that woman received some, I'll call it minor injuries, but she was taken to the hospital for evaluation. And the driver was arrested for possession of a stolen vehicle, aggravated eluding, DWI, hit and run, vehicular battery. He was also placed on a parole hold, and then there were some other traffic-related citations that were issued as well, but those were the big ones.
Passenger was not arrested.
Passenger was arrested for possession of stolen vehicle.
Were they involved in the initial incident, or was...
That we don't know at this point in time. The officers, once they arrested him, they were trying to get hold of the victim, and they weren't able to reach him. So that's one of the things. The victim gave a description. He didn't know the suspect at all, but he gave a fairly decent description of him. But at this point, we have not been able to determine if the suspect that was driving the car is the same man who stole it.
What's the time frame between when it was stolen and when they saw him at Cliff and 14?
It was stolen about 4:15 p.m. and then it was around 10:30 p.m. that he was found.
That same night?
The same night. Yep.
Okay.
His name?
The driver's name, last name is Martin, M-A-R-T-I-N. First is Chad, C-H-A-D. Middle is Dale, D-A-L-E, and he is a junior. He's 26 from Sioux Falls. And the passenger just had the one charge. His last name is Williams, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S. First is Isaiah, I-S-I-A-H. Middle, I just have the initial R. And he's 31 from Sioux Falls. The other aggravated assaults, nothing real big. A few reports, few people threatened, no serious injuries from any of those. The bomb threat, that was at Lincoln High Friday morning. That involved a juvenile. There was no device that was found. There was no threat to anybody, so it was no immediate threat to anybody. So this one was, there was a phone call that was made and just a threat. The burglaries, no arrests out of any of those. We had houses and apartments that were entered. Disorderlies, nothing big. Family offenses, frauds, larcenies, vandalisms. I didn't get a chance to review those. No big quantities on the narcotics. There's a couple of pornography reports. Those are both reports. Rape, that was another report. The robbery, that was at a motel. Had a guy that was inside his room, had a knock at the door. When he opened it, there was a guy outside. A little bit of conversation that took place, but basically the guy at the door wanted some change for $100. When the victim went to get some change and came back, the suspect grabbed the money and ran. Earlier during that conversation, the suspect had showed a firearm. There's no threat with that, but after the suspect took the cash, the victim didn't want to chase after him because he realized he had a firearm. So we believe that he ended up leaving in a stolen vehicle, but no arrests on that one and no injuries. Sex offenses are reports and sex offenders that didn't change their address. And the weapons violation, that was an accidental discharge. A guy was handling his gun in an apartment and it basically discharged. The bullet went through the ceiling of his apartment and into the apartment above him. No injuries. Once we kind of got everything sorted out, the suspect was found. He was arrested for reckless discharge of a firearm and possession of a loaded firearm while intoxicated.
His name?
Yep. His name, last name is Morgan, M-O-R-G-A-N. First is Jesse, J-E-S-S-E. Middle is Bo, B-E-A-U, and he's 44 from Sioux Falls. And I think that's it, unless I got anything else. Missed anything else? Okay, thank you.